If you go back in time a couple years ago, you'll remember that when I was in Natchez, we talked about doing DNA analysis, and I told the crowd, the group, that I had 2 testing kits at home that I had had for well over a year. One from Ancestry and one from 23andMe. And that I was just dragging my feet about turning those kits in because I was afraid that I would find out something I really didn't want to know. And everybody just laughed, just like you're laughing right now, and said, turn those kits in. So I did. I went home and I turned the kits in. And about 6 weeks later, in the middle of the night, I woke up and my trusty iPad was right there by me, like it is every night. And I picked it up and I had an email from 23andMe. My results were in. So I opened it up and I looked at my matches and I quickly found matches to my dad's line. My dad was my dad. I looked for my mom's line. I quickly found matches for my Watkins line. Easily found those. But there were no GAN matches. Not one. I was pretty much hysterical. My mother's father was not her father. I was panicked. I mean, I can't even describe to you how panicked I was because I was going to lose 25% of my ancestors, plus my whole GAN family. I called my cousin Teresa and I said, do you think that could be true? And she's like, she was not into genealogy then and she had absolutely no idea. She tried to calm me down. I called Gary and Bill and talked to them. They were saying, chill out. I talked to Charlie. Now this is all about before 8 o'clock in the morning, okay? I go to work. I tell everybody in the whole office, I might not be a GAN. I'm really flippant. But somehow or another, I started emailing Tom McCabe, and Tom is my third cousin. And Tom is by training a computer scientist, so he's very logical and he's very calm. And he said, okay, here's what you do. You put your results out on GEDmatch, and here's my kit number, and see if you match me. So I did that, and it was a match, and I calmed right down. So I'm always grateful to Tom, who led me to, some sort of peace over it, but I was pretty crazy at the time. And what I realize now is because I descend from Thomas, and the bulk of you descend from either Nathan Ignatius or John Steadfast, and it's so many generations removed, we share very little DNA. So all those names that I could see within 23andMe that I didn't match, like Thea, who I've known forever and considered her my cousin, we wouldn't match. It's too far back in time. If you look at the chart that Floyd presented, a sixth cousin shares 0.83 centimorgans. That's that much. So the fact that I don't match the majority of you doesn't concern me because now I understand it. And so these tools are going to help you understand your DNA results. And I'm going to just start off by saying that most of these tools I could spend many hours discussing, but I only have 45 minutes, so I'm just going to hit the high points, and then if there's something that you find interesting, you have a link and you can go out and follow it up. Okay? So let's see if we can get going. Okay, I'm going to go ahead. I'm just going to tell you quickly what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about cousin matching. Most of our work within the organization has been on our Y DNA line, but now we're branching out into autosomal, and autosomal to me is much more difficult to understand. So I'm going to focus on those tools that we can use to understand cousin matching. First thing we're going to talk about is X descendancy, which is the 23rd chromosome, X for females, Y for males, and how we can trace that X descendancy down through our ancestors. I'm going to talk a little bit about GEDmatch, not much, there's just way too much to go over. I'm going to talk a little bit about ethnicity estimates. You know, most people who test in this era, that's what they're interested in. They want to know if they're Scottish or Irish or whatever. And so we're going to talk a little bit about ethnicity estimates and the problems with those. We're going to talk about DNA GEDCOM, which is a program that's been developed. Talk about double match triangular, and talk about my personal favorite, Genome Mate Pro. I have a pedigree chart that you can't see. I'm here, I'm here. My parents are here, and then my grandparents are here. Okay? So my father's here, my mother's here. My father, to analyze his DNA, I use Y DNA testing. To analyze my mother's DNA, I do mitochondrial DNA. And then my grandparents, I use autosomal DNA. So those are basically the differences. And I think I'll show this chart later if we get my table. I think that will make it clear to those of you who've not done much work within DNA about how those three tests fit together. They each have a very different purpose. Questions about what I've said so far?
No.
But you're glad that I'm again, right?
I have a question on the family tree DNA. I know it was always the Y DNA they were using. Are people now downloading the Autosomal onto there?
Yes.
Yes.
They are? Okay,
Yes.
because I've run across some bands that didn't know that they could do that. Now I can think it.
No, there was a time that Ancestry changed the chip that they were using to process testing, and it took them a while to get that reprogrammed.
Okay.
So now they are accepting results. So this is the chart that I described with my flight attendant moves. Here I am. Here are my parents, Rudolph Albert Silkey, Mary Elizabeth Gann, Isabel Gann, and then my father's parents and my mother's parents. And this is Elvis Paul Gann and Clara Leon Watkins. Okay. So again, if I want to look at my dad's DNA, I'm going to look at Y. If I want to look at my mom's, I'm going to look at mitochondrial. And if I want to look at cousins or my grandparents and beyond, I'm going to look at autosomal. Okay, here's my X descendancy chart. So here I am, okay? Now, I got an X from my dad. He had think about that. I got an X from my dad and I got an X from my mom. So I have two X's, right?
Female.
Two. That's because I'm female, okay? So my mom, she got an X from her dad and an X from her mother. She's female. My grandfather only got an X from his mother because his father has a Y. So you can tell that right here with the Gann line, I don't have any X DNA from my Gann line because of my grandfather. Okay? Now here's my grandmother down here. I do have, this is one interesting thing about my family. I do have an X from Sarah Ann Rogers, and I have an X from Henry James Rogers and Jersey Ann Friend. And if you remember, if you've been around for a long time, you know that Jersey Ann Friend and Eliza Jane Friend, the great-grandmother of Charlie and Dan and Tom, were sisters. So it is possible that I do carry an X chromosome that goes back through that Gann line, but it comes through the maternal line. So every once in a while I'll see somebody that I think, oh, that's a Gann, and that's how we're related. Okay, so anyway, here's my X. It comes back through Jack Watkins and my grandmother Rilla Powell, and then it comes from these three people, Lydia Margaret O'Bannon, William Sanders Powell, and Marianne Roddy. So you can see the X, here's the X, boom, 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 basically. And that's my mitochondrial line here, those three people. And so all of the pink ones are women who gave me an X. And all of the kind of blue ones are men that gave me an X. And the yellow ones are people that didn't give me anything. Okay? Now, this is my X descendancy, and I use this using the GEDmatch tool. and it's a multiple kit analysis using a 2D browser. The orange line is Teresa. Now, since Teresa and I are first cousins, and she got her X from her father, my mother's brother, and her X and the X that I got from my mom are coming from the same source. So we have a big chunk of X that we share. This is chromosome 23. Okay? Now, the pink person is a mother, and the blue person is her daughter. Let me tell you a little bit about this family. These are one of the first people that I communicated with once I started doing DNA. And she called, and I had Watkins posted. You know, my grandmother was a Watkins, and so she sent me an email and said maybe we're related. We'll quickly determine that no, we were not related through the Watkins line because the locations were off. But her family was from East Tennessee and from Greene County and, you know, the Jonesboro area and all that. So we talked back and forth, and she said, well, I have painter ancestors. Bingo! So she said, give me your kit number, and I'll run them against my painter line and see if you match on the painters. I didn't match any of them. Now, she doesn't give me a whole lot of information. She only gives me what she wants me to know. And she wrote me back and said there was a non-paternal event in the painter family, so all of us who are doing painter research, we need to know that. And so there are a number of people who are painters who are not genetically painters. And it so happens, I guess, that I don't know if I'm on the non-painter side or I'm on the painter side. She never told me that. All she told me was it wasn't a painter match. So we dropped it. You know, it's been a couple of years and we dropped it. She posted her tree information to Family Tree, and I looked up, you know, looked at her tree because I'm still kind of interested in knowing who she was. She's an O'Bannon. You remember that chart before with the O'Bannon and the fact that I got my X from the O'Bannon? This is the X that we share through that grandmother, Lydia Margaret O'Bannon. Now let me point one more thing out. See that little blue thing hanging out right there above the 92? That is a very small piece of DNA. It's less than 3 centimorgans. That is either what we call noise or, help me,
Sticky segment.
Sticky segment. It's identical by state, not descent. Now, personally, I think that DNA probably really belongs to her because I don't match her father, so I didn't get that DNA from her father. I probably got it from her mother. But you see how that DNA could not possibly come from that other segment at the top. See that? Yeah. If that came directly from her mother, that blue would extend all the way over on top of that little tiny segment. And so when we start talking about matches and size of centimorgans, the number of centimorgans is important because you can get these funny little segments that you can't really depend on to be a real match. Questions? I see some really wrinkled foreheads there.